And thank you everybody for joining us today. As Matt said, my name is Eric Santos. And I'm here today for aligning teaching to the Illinois Computer Science Standard. I'm the Regional EdTech Coordinator for the LTC of Illinois for the Chicagoland region. A brief introduction to me here. I was in public education. This is now my 16th year. I was a science, STEM, and technology teacher, wore a few different hats there at the middle school and elementary level. And I served as a technology learning coach, and a little bit of my CS background is I did teach some coding and some computer science in my STEM classroom. And I ran robotics club, coding club, STEAM club, and some other clubs after school. So that's just a little bit about me. You can scan that QR code or shoot me an email if you ever want to connect or learn more about me or if I can help in any way. But today we're going to talk about the Illinois computer science standards that were recently released and some of the legislation that's coming into effect in the coming year. We do have kind of a broad audience today. I tend to have a mix of teachers, tech coaches, instructional coaches, curriculum leaders, technology directors, administrators. So there's a kind of a wide audience who all are looking for different things. And this is a topic that 1 hour doesn't always do justice. This is really just getting our feet wet and getting started in this topic. So hopefully there's something here for everyone. Please do type any questions in the chat, even if it's not what we're talking about at the moment. I can always circle back and try to answer that. All right, so without further ado, here's what we'll talk about today. First, just a little bit of background on always starting with the why standards, and then getting into what is going to actually be required with the CS standards. We'll then deep dive into those standards to start getting you accustomed to what's included in them. We'll talk about how to align resources, and I'll share some examples of things that you can do to align your teaching to the standards. And then there'll be a place where you can ask questions at the end, and I'll have all the links from this presentation for you. And these are recorded, as Matt may have mentioned, and you'll be able to watch this again later if needed. All right, with that said, let's jump right in. So let's start with why CS standards. And you might already be invested in the idea of teaching computer science to your students. If not, hopefully this is convincing to you. But you may also find yourself in a position where you have to advocate for this to others. And so it's good to have some things in your background to be able to share. And you're welcome to, of course, share anything that I share here today. For me, the three big reasons for why we have computer science standards are three things: preparedness, so getting students ready for the workforce, preparing them for college, preparing them for the future; clarity, and equity. And so clarity and equity, what I mean there is really delineating what should and what needs to be taught and what maybe is less of a priority, making sure we're teaching students computer science in an age appropriate way, and then knowing if we're focusing on the right things. And then kind of related to that, the idea of equity. Computer science, we're not just starting at every school next year. There's plenty of schools who have been teaching aspects of computer science for a while. But oftentimes schools, without standards, schools were left to kind of decide on their own what they were going to include or what they were going to teach or whether they would at all. And so by having a set of standards, it brings everyone up to a level playing field where there's now expectations for all schools and all classrooms equally, rather than students rolling the dice and being fortunate enough to be in a district or a school or even a classroom where coding and CS are taught and others are not. Now we've got kind of a level playing field for everyone. So that's a little bit of why CS standards would be produced. Additionally, up until now, schools or classrooms might have been trying to pick and choose from some of these standards that you see here that are, on a national level and that maybe weren't officially adopted, but were a good starting point. But with every school maybe choosing their own route, having a set of standards for Illinois makes sense to get everyone on the same page. Why teach computer science at all? Here's a couple of excerpts that you may have seen from code.org. The approach here is that computer science is a fundamental foundational skill, just like students learn a variety of skills that we find to be important for everyone's education: literacy, math, information about the body, information about the world and the environment. We believe computer science falls into those categories as well and should be taught foundationally. Additionally, I mentioned equity earlier, but having a set of standards helps us start to bridge the gap and solve the diversity problem that does exist in the CS world and in the STEM world and STEM careers, both diversity from the perspective of gender as well as race and ethnicity. There's a couple of articles I linked to there that you're welcome to then use as well as you'd like if you're sharing research with others. But here's a little bit of information about CS education by state. So this is if you click this link, and I can actually drop that in the chat for you, this is on code.org's site, and it was done in conjunction with a couple of other organizations. and I'm going to drop those in the chat. But it basically broke down where each state is in terms of CS education by high school. I found it interesting that 51% of public high schools offer a foundational computer science course, so just about half. You can see here, based on the color coding, where Illinois falls within that. And this was a 2021 report, so this is last year's data. But if you were to break down and actually click on the Illinois handout, it gives you a lot more specific details about Illinois. That site in general is a great place to go if you want to do some comparisons state to state. But one thing that came out of that report is that, you know, part of what pushes computer science education forward is making sure that we have policies as a state in place that are supporting that. And so, kind of as a guideline, there are 9 policies that make computer science fundamental listed in that report. And one of them is having a set of state standards. Previously, we did not, and so now we will. And so we're moving forward as a state and getting there. So there's kind of a breakdown of those 9 policies. Obviously, you can see here was Illinois' breakdown. Originally, we did not have any, and this was in progress as of 2021, and now we would be able to mark ourselves as a yes. I see a quick question in the chat. Yes, I am going to share the slides at the end of this presentation. I'll share out these slides, so you'll definitely get a link to them. All right, so that's a little bit about the why. So let's talk about what. What are the requirements and what's expected? And this is all basically, you know, as a result of this House bill / Public Act that came out. So this is in state legislature now, and so ISBE has come out with the computer science standards to support that. But let's start with some good news, right? As soon as we hear requirements, sometimes we tend to think, uh-oh, what's coming down the pike? But there's a lot of good news here to share. First, you're likely addressing some or many of the expectations already if you're doing some form of technology or computer science in classrooms. Furthermore, you can integrate a lot of the standards into a variety of content areas, even those that are not tech focused. You can definitely address multiple standards at a time, and they're organized by grade band. So you don't have to feel pressured that every single grade level has to have something specific going on, as long as you're hitting those standards within a grade band. There are plenty of resources out there, and I'll share some of them towards the end. And this is really an opportunity and a thing that you could look at as the fun stuff, right? If you look in the chat, Jesse Irvin, thank you, from ISBE, dropped in a link to those computer science standards. So many of you have probably seen them. You can take a look, and there they are, and that link is in the chat for you. All right, with that said, a little bit of background before we dig into them. It's important to delineate that computer science doesn't necessarily mean coding. The two are not synonymous, I should say. Computer science encompasses coding. Coding is a huge part of it, but typically when we hear the word CS or computer science, we think immediately it's coding. And it is, but that's not all there is to it. Coding is a major component, but there's more to it, and we'll get into that in just a second. It's also important to know, and this is really important, especially important today, and I'll explain why in a minute. Computer science and computer literacy there's some overlap, but they're looked at as two completely different topics. And so ISBE actually defines pretty well and delineates them pretty well as separate ideas. So let's dig into that a little bit, because there are a set of computer science expectations, and then there's computer literacy expectations. All right, so let's get into some definitions. So we're talking computer science today, so let's start there. Computer science, according to ISBE, is the study of computers and algorithms that includes all of the things bulleted right there on your screen. Okay. They also delineate that CS does not include the everyday use of computers and applications such as keyboarding or accessing the internet. So that's computer science. They also have a definition, and thank you, Jesse, for dropping those in the chat. There are 2 documents that are really helpful to kind of break all of this down. There's a fact sheet for computer science and a fact sheet for computer literacy. And this is all pulled straight from those. This is just like a quick walking you through each of the things that are in those one-pager sheets. They're really great. And then so computer literacy, on the other hand, is going to be one's knowledge of and ability to use computers and related technologies efficiently and effectively. So if you look at what that includes, it's a different set of ideas. There, again, I did mention there's overlap, right? We see impact of computers on society kind of appears in both of those definitions. So there's overlap, but we are thinking of them as 2 separate sets of ideas to teach. All right, so let's now talk about the requirements from the state. So we'll actually start with computer literacy first, and then we'll come back to computer science. So in terms of computer literacy, we'll start with high school. So high schools, beginning with the coming school year, 2022, 2023, your ninth graders are going to have a couple of requirements. First, they're going to need to participate in a 1 year of a course that includes intensive instruction in computer literacy. That's the language that we're using. That is going to be a graduation requirement. Now, they don't have to participate in that course their freshman year in 22, 23, but by the time they graduate in 25, 26, they have to have completed a course. A couple of caveats: it can be a course that's counted towards other graduation requirements. So a class can double dip. It can fill the computer literacy requirement as well as other requirements. And it can be any subject. It does not have to be a tech course. It doesn't have to be called computer literacy. And it can even be two separate, semester courses per se that as long as they're equivalent as a full year course, that would qualify. And so there's that fact sheet in the chat, but there's also this set of Illinois graduation requirements. And you can see now there that computer literacy is listed as a requirement with a description there, and then that would be checked off and starting in the year 22, 23. So again, next year, your freshmen coming in before they graduate have to complete a course that has includes intensive instruction in computer literacy. Additionally, and so there's just kind of an excerpt from the graduation requirements. And so here's a little visual that can help you out. So again, here's the school years, and then your ninth graders just kind of following that class in bold. They're the first group that's going to have to graduate with that requirement. Next year, anyone who's 10th grade or higher is not going to fulfill that requirement. Doesn't mean they couldn't also participate in this class, but it's important to know that they're not required, that every other class afterwards will be required to. Okay, further requirements. So grades K through 12. So that was just high school. Grades K through 12, the language states that we must ensure students receive developmentally appropriate opportunities to gain computer literacy skills at each grade level. That had been something that if you were paying attention and kind of knew about this legislation, that was kind of up in the air. Like, what does that mean? What does developmentally appropriate look like? What are these opportunities? We need more guidelines. And the good news is that as of probably, I'm thinking just this week, because I just heard about it today. This guidance just went live. Oh, it was today. Thank you, Jesse. She just posted in the chat that this document called the Computer Literacy Knowledge and Skill Development Continuum is now available. Super helpful document and really well put together. But if you take a look, it breaks down these different areas of computer literacy. It gives you the grade levels, and it even breaks them down into basically a beginning, developing, and secured. So like a beginning, middle, and advanced type of thing. And it kind of delineates for you very clearly where students should be with each of these at each grade level. Now, this is not the focus of today's session. Today's about computer science, but it's super important that we have this, this came out today and it's very timely, so I wanted to share it because this is what's going to be something you're going to need to be addressing beginning next year if you're K through 12. The good news is a lot of it's kind of laid out for you. You'll also see a lot of it are things that you're probably already doing in a lot of cases, especially if your school's one-to-one. Identifying basic components of a device, turning it on and off, using a mouse and trackpad. So again, that's just one area, and we can go through and see all the different areas. But much of this are things that if your students are using devices regularly and they're involved in computing in any way, you're probably teaching this either directly or they're picking it up as you're doing projects in school. Now it's just that we're formalizing and we're being very clear about what's, what schools and what teachers and what students should be doing at each level, which just makes planning a little better. And again, it makes that equity piece a little more formalized, and that every student is now expected to get these things in each class at each grade level. And it also helps you provide professional development to your teachers to help prepare them so that everyone's on a level playing field as well. Starting here at page 6, they have examples of how you can integrate a lot of these concepts into a variety of subject areas, again, that are not technical. So there's social studies, there's science, ELA and math are all included here. So again, this is computer literacy focused. So please take some time to dig into that document on your own time and look at all the great information that's there and the integration opportunities that are there. And that just dropped today. So very well timed for our webinar today. Now, with that said, and there's kind of a breakdown if you needed a one-pager of the 4 major areas of computer literacy. and a screenshot of what they look like. With that said, here's what you'll need to know about computer science. So computer science is not required for graduation for high school. However, high schools must provide the opportunity for at least one computer science course that's accessible to all students. And that's not going to start next year, but the year after, 2023 and 2024. Okay. So again, going back, computer literacy, K through 12, next year, students should be gaining all of these skills. Computer science, the standards that were published are there, but there's no mandate for K through 8. And the mandate 9 through 12 is just to provide one computer science course accessible to all students. I know many high schools out there may be doing that already. If you're not, you've got till 2023, and there's plenty of time, I think, to get that put together. And so here's something that can help. If you, I'm actually going to grab that link and copy it in. But the CS course and assignability recommendations is another ISBE document that was put out that'll help you, because what this does is it lists, thank you, Jesse, very well timed. That lists out all of the courses that are approved for CS, and then across the top it shows what endorsement teachers would need in order to be approved to teach that course. So very helpful for your, for your planning in terms of staffing and who would be teaching those courses. All right, thank you. And again, Jesse just dropped that link in that chat with a little bit of information about that document I just showed you. All right, so to summarize, because that was a lot of information all at once, there's a one-pager to kind of break it down for you. Computer literacy is a high school graduation requirement starting next year for those freshmen that are coming in next school year, 2022-23. K through 12, you're providing opportunities using that guidance document that ISBE released today. This is outdated, so actually this slide needs to change. It said no specific standards. That was true as of yesterday, but as of today, we do have that link to that guidance. So I will make sure that slide gets changed for those of you who are going to get a copy of those slides. Computer science, there's no graduation requirement, but grades 9 through 12 must offer a minimum of one CS course available to any 9 through 12 student beginning not next year, but the following school year. So that's a summary. And again, I'll update this slide to have a link to the new guidelines that were released today. Okay. And again, computer science standards exist for K-12, but there's no mandate for them in K through 8. All right, so now that we've kind of got that clarified, hopefully, again, feel free to drop questions in the chat. But here's a few outstanding questions that I've heard that you may still be asking that there's not an answer for quite yet, but it's good to be thinking about them. So computer literacy is required K through 8. Will CS computer science instruction be mandated K through 8 at some point? That's still up in the air right now, and that's a question that I'm hearing from people. What do computer literacy developmentally appropriate opportunities look like? Will there be standards? Well, you know what? We've got that answer today. So now we've got a pretty detailed document that lists out exactly what to expect. What high school courses are approved for the Comp Lit requirements? So that's something that I've heard from people. And then is there overlap between the Comp Lit concepts and the computer science standards? And I think as we go through this webinar, you'll start to see the answer to some of that yes, there is some overlap. And what will compliance reporting look like is another question that's out there. So some of these are being answered. Some of them are answered today, and some of them we're going to look for answers over time. I will just say as we move on from this section, and now that I've mentioned computer science and computer literacy requirements, we've talked a lot about them from the standards, from the standpoint of them being requirements and mandates. But I'd really like to look at this as an opportunity and to kind of think about how we're approaching this. Here's some of the language from the mandate. It says local districts may set requirements for graduation or participation beyond the state minimum requirements. So keep in mind, just because you're only required to have one computer literacy course, or you're only required to offer CS as an option, that's the bare minimum. It doesn't mean that a school couldn't decide to require more than that for graduation. It doesn't mean that a school couldn't offer more opportunities than what's required. I'd also think about another piece of language in the mandate about accessible and opportunity, right? So, are we offering computer science, computer literacy education that is truly accessible to everyone, to students, regardless of their background, regardless of whatever technology they may or may not have at home, regardless of their language? their status as an English language learner or a multilingual student, their any disabilities they may have. Are they truly accessible courses, and are students all being offered the opportunity? So think of this, especially if you have an established program, as an opportunity to say, let's make sure everyone's having the opportunity. And finally, just kind of looking at all of this from the standpoint of compliance, checking a box and making sure we got what the state asked versus program development. And so that's really important now. If you're just now realizing that the requirement is computer literacy K through 8, and you're not technically required to teach anything computer science, you might still say, well, we might not have to be compliant, but we still want to develop a program. We still believe in computer science as a K through 8 endeavor. So just kind of a mindset shift, and think about how you're approaching this. So with that said, here's kind of a one pager with all of those links. So when you get these slides, you'll be able to have them. I do need to add in there the computer literacy stuff, but again, that just dropped today. So I'll add that in before this gets sent out to you. All right, so now that we've kind of got background in why computer science is important and what are the requirements and the mandates, let's do a deep dive into the standards. Again, these are the computer science standards that we can dig into and understand a little better. In order to dig in, I think it's important to kind of see where they came from. So two places to look. One is the K-12 CS framework. So this is essentially a framework giving you background on everything that is included in computer science, both the practices, meaning the things that students would do, the big concepts that underlie all computer science work, as well as what students should be able to do by grade band. So this already existed, and based on that, the CSTA, the Computer Science Teachers Association, created a set of standards that many people in the computer science world have kind of been using or adopting on their own. And you can kind of go through that link and see all of them here. But the Illinois standards were basically based on these two documents. And if you want to check the chat, Jesse is responding to some of those outstanding questions that were on a slide a few slides back, and she's got some great information for you there. So jumping back into what I was saying, the Illinois standards are very closely mirroring the CSTA standards with just a few deviations. Illinois did add 2 practices and did add 1 concept to what's in CSTA, but other than that, they're very closely aligned. So I think Jesse shared earlier this document, which is the CS standards, which has everything that the state is asking. Something that I put together that was based on a document that CSTA had out was an integrated view that just takes all of those standards and drops them into kind of this matrix here, so you can see them all on one page. So if you're someone who has to plan for multiple grade levels, maybe you're a tech coach, or maybe you're a curriculum director and you're needing to plan and see these for all grade levels, this is a document that might help you out. I'm going to drop a link to it in the chat for you. And that'll just show you everything about the standards by category on the left, all of the grade bands on the right, and then all of those standards from the state's document in this one matrix. So you're welcome to use that and make a copy, modify it if you need to. And then the second 2 tabs at the bottom this has everything, all grade levels, but the second 2 tabs at the bottom have just K-8 and then 9-12 if that's easier. And also I should mention, sorry, going back to that, there is a link at the top here that'll take you to a Google Docs version. So if you wanted to click that, if you like Google Docs better, sometimes it's a little easier to work in than Sheets for some folks, feel free to use that link as well. All right, so there's 2 components of the CS standards to know about. One is the 9 practices. So just going from this K-12 CS site where these practices originally came from, there's 7 practices that basically outline what are important concepts in computer science, okay? The state of Illinois added 2 more. So let's break those down. These that are circled in red, the CSK-12 organization calls these the heart of computer science. So this is computational thinking, okay? These that are outlined in blue, number 1, 2, and 7, are kind of general complementary, as they would say, complementary concepts. They really are connected to those 4 C's, right? Collaborating, communicating, creativity, critical thinking. These last 2 were added by the state of Illinois, and they're really about technology and society, and then students' self-reflection and awareness about their computer science understandings. So those are, if you're looking for the why behind the standards, this is a good place to go, and digging into them deeper on the K-12 CS site will get you into the why. So if you're kind of new to the idea of teaching computer science, really digging into those helps give you that background. But if you're focused on the instruction side, the concepts are what you're looking for. So what you see broken down, let me find it, in the computer science standards, okay, when we talk about the standards, we're generally talking about these concepts and what CSTA calls concepts on the left in the first column, and then sub-concepts, okay? So this is an overview of what those concepts are. And so let's go through them. The first 5 were taken basically from what CSTA produced, and then the state of Illinois added this 6th one, emerging and future technologies. So I'll break those down a little bit. And so here's the sub-concepts that fit underneath each one of those, or subtopics that fit under each one of those. I won't read them to you, but one thing to note is that emerging and future technology doesn't have any subtopics. The rest of them do. And algorithms and programming, coding is not a subtopic. I just put that there to indicate that this entire concept is probably the biggest one in the standards, and that's usually the one people think of first, right? First thing they think of when they think of CS is coding, and this is actually where all those coding topics live. So if you think about that, that's just one out of the 6 areas. So if you're teaching computer science to the CS standards, coding again is part of it, but it's not everything. Here I wrote out for you just a quick, and this is just a 1-pager you can use to kind of translate them almost into layman's terms. What do each one of these topics really cover? And rather than show this slide, I'm going to break each one of them down one at a time. So the computing systems topic really is about understanding how computers work and learn, and to use them effectively. There's a decent amount of overlap here with the computer literacy guidelines that were just released. And so this is an area where, again, you might find yourself double dipping. So instead of looking at it as, wow, I've got these 2 whole new sets of standards I got to create an entire curriculum for, a lot of this is going to be embedded into what you're already doing with students. I would recommend formally integrating this into existing projects and curriculum, and maybe giving students some tech training at the beginning of the year. They get their new devices, they get their Google accounts, you give them a little training. Typically schools are doing this. And all I'm saying is make this a little more formal. Now you've got a checklist of things from the standards, both computer science and computer literacy, that you know every kid needs to get. You don't have to make that up off the top of your head or take a guess. Just integrate that into what you're doing, and you'll be good to go. So as an example of that, just kind of looking at the CS standards for computer systems. So like K-2, select and operate appropriate software to perform a variety of tasks. So if your students are picking up iPads in 1st and 2nd grade, and they're using a variety of different apps, and you're instructing them on, choosing an app that does the thing they want to do, you're really addressing that standard. Let's skip down to troubleshooting 3 through 5. Determine potential solutions to solve simple hardware and software problems using common troubleshooting strategies. That sounds a lot more complicated maybe than it is. If your students run into issues with the iPad, do they know what to do to troubleshoot it? Do they know what to do when it freezes up, or when an app isn't acting right, or they can't get onto the internet? Do they know how to fix problems with the app, or do they know how to charge it? Do they know how to go through a set of steps to fix an issue? That's really what you're looking for. And a lot of times these are things that you're just teaching them as they're using the device. All right, the second topic is networks and the internet. This one, if I were to sum it up, I would say this is understanding how the internet works and how to keep yourself and your systems safe online. I'd say at the K-2 level, you can integrate, again, a lot of this into what teachers are already doing with the device. If we could take a look at what's there at K-2, explaining what passwords are and why we use them, and so on. I think if you're teaching students not to share their password with others and why they're important, you're in a good place. I think as you start to go through these standards a little into the higher grades, that's where you start saying, now it's time for us to maybe teach some actual mini lessons about these topics, or maybe this is something that a special area class, a media class, or a computer class that they go to might start to address these as they get beyond 3rd grade. All right, data analysis is the third topic. And if I were to sum this one up, it would be managing data by collecting, storing, and displaying it visually, using tools to analyze and draw inferences. My math and science teachers, this is your time to shine. This is something that a lot of these standards can be formally integrated into the curriculum that teachers are already doing. Again, if you're someone who supports teachers, this is an opportunity to show them how they can address both math standards or science standards at the same time as they're addressing these computer science standards by having students use technology to do some of those things that they're already doing. So representing data using multiple encoding schemes. Here's another one, organize and present collected data visually and highlight relationships to support a claim. We've even got some ELA in there, right? Supporting a claim. So there's plenty of opportunities to integrate those naturally into the curriculum. All right, here's the big one, algorithms and programming, coding, right? I like to call this think like a computer so you can train it to do great things, all right? There's so many options, and I'll get into this more in the aligning resources section, but there are plenty of opportunities for K through 2 and any grade level to do no device lessons, meaning computational thinking or coding that doesn't require you to be on a device or using a screen or doing any actual coding or block coding. And I'll share with you some resources on that a little later. But this is your coding portion, and this one may be a little harder to integrate without doing a coding lesson, but I think you'll find that it's a whole lot of fun, and you can get teachers on board with this. All right, here are the ones where we intersect a little bit with society. So the impacts of computing. I call this where technology meets society. It involves privacy, ethics, and equity. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for integration. Again, K through 2 and 3 through 5, you can integrate these right into your existing lessons. Taking a quick peek at some of these in the purple section here, compare how people live and work before and after the implementation or adoption of new computing technology. I mean, there's constantly new things coming out, and there are articles and podcasts and videos that you can watch about new technologies. And, as a teacher who's, probably lived through quite a bit of change, you can share with students your experience on how technology has changed the way we live and work, and students can definitely research that. Seek diverse perspectives for the purpose of improving computational artifacts. So kind of integrating the idea of diversity and culture in computational thinking. So really good stuff here, and opportunities, I think, to really integrate with social studies, science, and ELA. So connect with your curriculum people, connect with your social studies, science, and ELA people who know their topics well. And I think you'll find that many of these standards can fit nicely into a project that they're doing where they can integrate some technology. All right, finally, this is the one that Illinois added, and it's about emerging and future technologies. And to me, this can be summarized by what's new in tech, what's coming next, and what will it all mean? This is an opportunity area. I think this is a set of standards that can be integrated well, again, into areas like science, social studies, and ELA. I'm going to share in the aligning resources section some examples of places to find lessons related to this. But if you take a look, and an interesting thing with these 5 standards is they are the same 5 things that are happening in every grade band from kindergarten all the way till they graduate high school. So essentially, the same concepts are being explored. It's going to be up to teachers to kind of figure out how to do these in an age-appropriate way. And you may not get to all of them in every grade level, and that's okay. But I think it's very possible to get students thinking about all of these. I really love this last one, create new or original work by applying emerging technologies. So anytime you're having students use tech to create something new, you are addressing that standard. All right, so that was a quick dive into the standards to give you a big picture concept of what's involved in them. And hopefully you can use both the state's document as well as this integrated view to get more familiar with them if you're involved in planning for these standards. So let's talk about resources that you can use to address them. The first thing that comes to mind, I think, for a lot of people is, where is this going to fit in? We already have these standards that we have to meet, and these other standards, and high schools now have media literacy coming, and we have computer literacy, computer science. Where do I fit it in? There's 3 real schools of thought of how you can do that I can think of. One is through a dedicated course. So high school, obviously this applies to you. Middle school, you might look at a special area class, and even elementary school, you might have a special that students go to that where computer science concepts can fit in, maybe a technology class, maybe something that a media literacy teacher is teaching, or something during library time, maybe during a STEM class. So somewhere where you can teach a few lessons at least solely dedicated to CS instruction. I think you can also look at targeted units and targeted lessons that are CS related, or projects that are CS related but are taught in existing classes. So I mentioned some places where you might be able to integrate with computer science with social studies or ELA or math, and some lessons that you work with a team. If you have a coach, awesome. If you have a curriculum person, awesome, that can help you develop some projects that will fit into your course, then that would be great. And then finally, integrating directly into content. And I'll share a couple examples of how this can happen, of redesigning lessons you're already doing to just incorporate some CS standards. So let's dive into some quick wins, right? Because some folks out there are going to say, listen, I want to jump into this, but I don't have a ton of time to like plan something huge. Where can I go to just get right in and start making computer science happening? I think for elementary, Scratch Junior is a great entry point if you have no or very little background on coding or computer science. I love Scratch Junior. It is available, on most mobile devices, but it's a really simple version of Scratch, you might say, and it is a drag and drop block-based coding where students can go to this site, and I'll just click on it now. And you have a variety of activities that are built in, and they come with task cards. They actually tell students how to go about creating each of these projects step by step. So even if you have students who are not proficient readers yet, they can follow along and figure out how to make this happen and make their character do the things on the activity. The awesome thing about this is, one, you're not just limited to the step-by-step instructions. Students can definitely start tinkering and replacing those blocks with other options and just trying on their own to see how their coded instructions make their character interact on the screen. And so they're going to take this and they're going to go in all kinds of different directions. And you as a teacher don't necessarily need to control or direct everything they're doing, because they'll have some freedom to do that. But what's even more awesome is that you're already hitting some of those standards that, if you're new to CS, might be a little scary at first. The straight up coding, computer science standards, algorithms, control, modularity, program development, all of these things will be happening as students are doing these projects. If you're new to computer science and you teach the little ones, this is a great place for you to even tinker around and start learning how block-based coding works and to try your hand at it as well. So I highly recommend that. And let me just drop a link. I know you're going to have these slides, but I'll drop a link in the chat if anyone wants to check that out themselves. There's a link to the Dribble the Basketball one if you're interested. And you can just click back on Teach to go back to the original list of activities. All right, another quick win. If you're a middle school teacher and you're really interested in coding, one quick win is MakeCode and Microbit. So Microbit is the physical microcontroller, and then MakeCode is the coding site by Microsoft. And essentially what you do is you get this little microcontroller, it plugs into the students' devices. It will work with Chromebooks. And students are able to do block-based coding, not too different from what's going on here in Scratch Junior, a little more advanced, of course. And they're able to then use their code to make things happen on the physical microbit, as well as some of the peripheral attachments that you can connect to it. You can actually go to the MakeCode site, and without even having the microbit, which I think it only costs like 20, 25 bucks, but even if you don't have a microbit, you can go in here and do any of these projects, and it actually has a simulator in it that'll let you see what it would look like if you had a microbit. And so you can do your coding right there and see what would light up and what would happen on your microbit. So no purchase necessary per se. You can learn. Again, if you're a teacher who's new to computer science and you need somewhere to learn, this is a great place to do it. If you want to buy a microbit or microbits for your students, you can, or you can just use the virtual one that's built in. And I really love that if you look, they have not just the block-based coding, but you can see here they have JavaScript and Python. So if you are wanting to push students into more advanced text-based coding, you can do that as well. And that addresses, again, some of these tougher to hit computer science standards that I just screenshotted right here. Hardware and software, designing projects that combine hardware, so the physical microbit, and software from MakeCode to collect and exchange data. There you go, you're hitting that one right there. Systematically identify and fix problems. Guess what? They're going to run into problems with their code. It's not going to work the way they expect sometimes, and they're going to have to troubleshoot and try again. And finally, collecting data and transforming data. So there are sensors that you can connect to this device that can help them connect data from their real world. And so you can really dig into some of these standards, and that's just a snippet of what it would address. Obviously, it would also address, because it's block coding or Python or JavaScript, it's going to address many of these coding standards as well for the grade levels that you teach. So a couple of quick wins for any grade. Code.org is a completely free and amazing site for coding. When I was first learning, what coding looked like in schools, I went to code.org and just did a lot of the lessons as if I was a student. But they have a variety of courses. Each of these is a set of courses that you can see are aligned to different grade levels. The great thing is they are already aligned to CSTA standards. And if you need a little help with that, I'm going to link you here to this document that Brian Bates from the LTC put together. So you'll have a link to that. This is a document he's working on that right now. He's got K through 5, the fundamentals course on code.org. It aligns the lessons from code.org to the CSTA standards and aligns that to the Illinois CS standards. So if you're someone who's in charge of like planning and making sure that you're addressing all standards, this document is going to be super helpful to you, because it goes through each of the courses from code.org and lets you know which standards are addressed. So big thank you to Brian for putting that together. If you're not familiar with code.org, I'd say definitely spend some time here, because you can dig into any one of these courses and find a lot of really awesome stuff for your students of any grade level. And the great thing is they're such self-paced courses. I mean, you can assign students things to do and you can monitor their progress, but you can also just give them some open time to learn on their own. There's videos and instructions embedded and broken down. And there's even, I mentioned earlier, unplugged activities. Those are activities that don't require a device. You can, anywhere where you see an unplugged activity, you can go in there and there's videos and there's going to be worksheets available from the teacher end that will allow you to run this activity without the device. So there is the device component here, but there's also a place to go grab worksheets and things for your students to do without having to be on a device. Another quick win, if you want to look at high school and middle school, CodeHS is a great program that has a great website that has a variety of computer science programs out there. And let me give you a link to that. And they have a lot of advanced stuff. So if you're middle school or high school and you're saying, we want to jump into this quickly, we want to just grab a curriculum and get going, this is a great place to go. And you can spend a lot of time digging into all of their computer science. They have AP computer science. So this is great for your middle school and your high school level. And they have all kinds of things that aren't necessarily just coding, but web design, cybersecurity, all there. Mobile apps, a lot of great stuff. So dig into codehs.com. I do see in the chat someone mentioned code.org provides great PD. Yes, and the LTC is the regional partner here for Illinois for code.org. We've got some sessions coming up that I believe as of now, there's still availability for you to apply to go to one of those PD sessions over the summer. One more place to go, Seesaw is working on, they have already some lessons in place and they're working on continuing to develop lessons that align to those CS standards. You can see they've got a list here of the standards and then several different lessons that you can find and which standards they align to. So if your school is already a Seesaw school, you'll probably be happy to find that you can search for computer science lessons and find a variety of them already there for you. So again, really important to be able to jump in and just be able to start teaching right away if you're so inclined, and there's some great resources to help you. With that said, let's say you're in a position, in this section I'll talk a little bit about if you're in a position like say a tech coach, an instructional coach, a curriculum person, someone who is in charge of building a program, and you're trying to figure out how do I make sure it aligns to these new CS standards, where do I start? This is an approach I would take. This is one way to go about it. So if this is something that you're tasked with, or even if you're, just a teacher who's like, I want to make sure everything I'm doing aligns to these standards, here's what I might do. I might first start by digging into these standards and kind of figuring out, what does each of them really mean? What are they asking me to do just in plain English? And once you've done that, you might think about, what am I already doing that matches up with those standards? Where are there opportunities for me to build on things I'm doing in class and include those standards? What gaps exist? So is there an area, maybe down here, where I say, hey, I'm not doing a whole lot of this in my class. I need to find some lessons or some ideas to have students talk a little bit more about this topic, and identify those, and then start finding resources. So let me give you an example of how you might go about doing that. I'll take an example of one standard. This is K through 2, so this is your youngest grade band. And I took what I think is kind of a tough one. Again, if you're not strong in a CS background, algorithms. So algorithms, I have K2 AP08, model daily processes by creating and following algorithms, a set of step-by-step instructions to complete tasks. So let's say I have that, let me go back, sorry. Let's say I have that standard and I'm trying to figure out, how do I unpack that? Like, how do I know that I'm actually doing this with my students? And how can I make sure that this is happening? Or if I'm a specialist or a coach or a curriculum director, how do I get this happening in my classrooms without overwhelming teachers? So some of the back end stuff you might do, and here's where it's important that I showed you the CSTA standards and the K-12 CS framework, because they come back into play as you're unpacking those standards. I'm going to start by going to the CSTA standards website. And again, because they're so similar to the Illinois standards, I can go down here and I can actually use this site to filter what I'm looking for. So I'm going to choose K through 2. I'm going to click on concepts. I said algorithms and programming, and then algorithms. Okay. I read through it. Yep, that's that same standard I just said I was going to unpack. When I click this little drop down here, it actually gives me some detail, and there's some examples built in for many of these. It says, I'm going to skip ahead. Students could create and follow algorithms for making simple foods, brushing their teeth, getting ready for school, and participating in cleanup time. What do you know? It turns out that this standard is about a way of thinking and not just about making a computer do something, right? So I can relate this to things that students do every day. An algorithm is essentially a set of steps. Students follow steps all the time. Okay, now I'm thinking about this in a little bit of a different way. Let me go now to that K-12 CS framework. If I jump down to 2nd grade, actually it's already selected. Let me just scroll down and I find my algorithms. Here we go. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to click the description and I find a lot more information. And this is important because if some of these standards are new to you, if you're not a CS or a tech person and you're tasked with figuring this out, here's how you can start to build some of that background and make it make sense to you. Right. So one of the things they say here is routines, morning meetings, cleanup time, and dismissal are examples of algorithms that are common in many early elementary classrooms. Interesting. So as I read on, turns out that again, there's some real world comparisons to the things that students will be learning later on in computer science. So it's important again then to kind of look at this and see, as they go through this same subtopic throughout the grade bands, they're going to have to get a little bit more complex. So comparing and refining multiple algorithms in 3rd through 5th. In 6th through 8th, they're looking at flowcharts and pseudocode. I might have to Google pseudocode and see what that means. But I'm starting to put together what exactly are students supposed to be doing, and then what does my K through 2 teacher need to do to set them up for that later. Turns out we just need to get them to think about things in life as a set of step-by-step instructions. Turns out I can dig into some of the other standards that are out there and to start to figure out where these connect to those. And in fact, they do. So let me give you an example of that. And I kind of showed some of this live, so I'm going to skip these steps because this is exactly what I just showed you. But it turns out Common Core for 1st grade has this standard: write narratives in which they recount 2 or more appropriately sequenced events, etc. Step-by-step sequences, right? Sounds a lot like what that CS standard is about. And this one right here, write narratives in which they recount a well-elaborated event or short sequence of events, so on and so on. Again, there's step-by-step writing. So there's opportunities there for us to integrate some of these CS ideas into ELA as well. So we don't have to necessarily write an entirely new lesson or make it fit in as an additional thing, just kind of tack on to what students are already doing. All right, so where might I start matching resources? So now this is where that code.org site really comes in. It turns out using that awesome document that Brian put together, that same CS standard algorithms actually matches up really well with things in both course A and course B. And let me just click on it. There's an unplugged lesson there that like I mentioned earlier, doesn't require a device. It does ask students to use paper and pencil to do some step-by-step thinking. So you can go to that lesson, or you can have them jump right into the coding. And this lesson, this has lesson plans with worksheets and vocabulary for the teachers. So it's all right there for you. Another thought, and something that I know many elementary teachers do, is they have students learn to write step-by-step instructions, right? Like how to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich is one, right? You let students try to write the steps or explain the steps. You quickly realize that they're missing things, that they're putting things out of order, and their details matter and the sequence matters. And so they're already kind of learning how to write algorithms, and it's an ELA skill, but now you just bring in some of the CS stuff that does the exact same thing, and it works out really well and mixes nicely. Remember this quick win from elementary, right? Scratch Junior. Again, writing algorithms, step-by-step instructions, students have to know how to put all of these code blocks in order and how to make them all start and stop at the right times in order to tell a story or run a race or have a basketball game occur. So you can really integrate these again into what teachers are already doing in their classroom, and you're hitting a lot of standards there. All right, so that was just one quick example. If you're a person who's in charge in your school or your district of trying to figure a lot of this out, and even if you're doing a lot of this already and you're just trying to take an assessment of where are we and which standards are we hitting and what's missing, here's a couple documents you might use or you might modify to help you out with that. And I'm going to drop these in the chat as well, and you're welcome, you're welcome to click on them and check them out. The first one is an alignment worksheet. So I might use this if I know that I want to try and see in what grade level I am hitting each one of the standards. So I might go through and I might look at each of these standards, and this is where I might do some of that breaking down about what they mean. I might jot some notes about what I think is happening, where I think this might be happening in my school. And if I know that this is happening in kindergarten and first grade in their curriculum that they already have with their library teacher, I might write that in. And if there's a curriculum resource that I want to make sure students are using, I can drop a link to it here. So you can use this tool however you see fit, but I imagine kind of using it to check off what's happening in which grade level, so I can make sure that every standard is being addressed somewhere. And I'll uncheck all of those so you can make a copy if you need to. I've got a version for 3rd through 5th and 6th through 8th there as well. If you're 9th through 12th and need a version of this, I'm happy to put that together. Just let me know. So that's one possible document you can use to start making sure you're addressing all of the standards. Another one is this mastery worksheet. This might be a little bit more advanced. So if you're a CS teacher, or maybe if your district already has a really good program going or some activities going, you might list a set of lessons across the top. You might list a set of courses across the top. You might list units or projects across the top. And you can go through and just check off throughout the course of a semester or a year at what point each one of these is addressing any of the standards. So let's say lesson 1, is addressing, and I'll show you what these letters mean in just a minute, is addressing these standards. As you read through, boom, those are being hit. And then you can just go through each lesson that you've typed up here and figure out where you are addressing standards and where you're missing them. All I did was create this system of introduced, addressed, and mastered. You could change any of those letters and names and colors if you want, and it'll populate to this drop down. You can make it match what ISBE came out with for the computer literacy standards if you like as well, if that makes it easier. But that's a document you can use to kind of track how a course or how a series of courses are addressing all of the standards. So just a planning document, maybe to use or to get you thinking about how to do this. And then of course, there's that crosswalk document that Brian put together that I linked to earlier. All right, I'm going to pause for a second because I see a chat question. We had questions come up on how to break apart what each grade level in the grade band will learn. That will help because we have a STEAM teacher for each grade band. Um, yeah, I'm sorry. And if I wasn't sure if you were just stating that or if you like, if there was a question, if you don't mind restating that, I will circle back around and make sure that I address that question in more detail. I feel like maybe I already answered that, but if not, just restate it for me. All right, so one more example project, and I'm going to share with you a bunch of resources and links. So here's an example project, something that I did with a computer teacher in middle school. And what I'm going to do here is kind of show an example of how you can take a project that might be kind of on a good project on a simple level and expand it to address multiple standards so that you can do some double duty there, right? And not have to reinvent the wheel or add a whole lot more content, but just modify what you've got. So this is a project that originally used a tool called a Makey Makey kit. So if you're not familiar with Makey Makey, I'll drop it in the chat. I think they go for about 50 bucks. And they're basically a microcontroller you compare to a student, you connect to a student laptop, and then using these alligator clips, anything that conducts electricity will send a message to the computer to control all of these different movements, left, right, up, down, space, click. And so you can basically take anything that conducts electricity like Play-Doh or graphite from a pencil or fruit or aluminum foil, and you can turn it into a controller where students or anyone can touch that object and send a message to the computer rather than using the keyboard. Really cool tool. They're pretty popular in schools. I'm curious if anyone out there is familiar with them. But the original project was, all right, create a Makey Makey project where you make a controller and use it to control a Scratch maze that we find onto the Scratch website, okay? You can see kind of a picture of the Play-Doh. We show students that picture. 9 times out of 10, they make a Play-Doh creation that's very similar to that. And we go from there. So here's an example of that project. Just by doing that simple project, having students use everyday objects to make a new controller for their game, they've addressed these standards. They're recommending improvements to the design of a device. They're designing projects that combine hardware, the Makey Makey, with software, the maze tool, the maze game. And they're systematically identifying and fixing problems because when they're building this, it's not going to work perfectly the first time and they have to troubleshoot to get it to work. So already this is a good project that's addressing a few standards. But let's start building on that and adding some more. Let's say that we add this highlighted part. Instead of just finding a maze on Scratch, students take a maze that they find and they have to modify it and build their own version of the maze. And anything in Scratch that you find, you can look inside to find the code behind it. And you can go ahead and remix it and use it on your own, right? And you don't have to use Scratch. I know some folks are mentioning that in the chat that Scratch is blocked, and I understand not every school will have access to it, but if you've got anything that students would generally control with their keyboard, they can use Makey Makey with that. Again, this is just an example of how to make a project a little more aligned to all of the standards. Just simply by having students code the project themselves, they're now hitting many of these algorithms and programming standards. And depending on how detailed you get into what students' requirements are, you might be hitting more or less of these. Obviously, if students are not familiar with block coding, this might be an opportunity to teach them step by step, or you might expect that they come in with a little bit of background knowledge. They may have already done some coding projects, and this might be a capstone. But obviously, this is going to incorporate all of these coding standards. And let's build on that, because we don't want to just focus on the tech side of things. Let's talk about human impact, right? Human interaction. So number 3, let's add this requirement to the project. Create a survey and collect data from a focus group of game testers. So maybe you tell students you have until next week. You need to create a Google Form survey, give people a link to your game that you've created, and get feedback from them on what they like and don't like about the game. Or they can do the same thing about their Makey Makey controller. Let's have everybody try each other's controller and give feedback and take a survey on the experience of using that student's controller. Well, by doing that, you've done a couple of things. One, you've now addressed the impacts of computing, right? Collaborating with many contributors through strategies such as crowdsourcing or surveys. And they're learning how to use Google Forms and they're getting feedback from their peers. By the way, they're collecting data. So there's some collection to the data and now some connection to the data analysis standard there as well. Let's build on that. Instead of just saying that they're going to design a makey project, let's see if they can now design a more accessible game controller, one that allows not you to play with it, but a student with a specific physical challenge or a student with a disability that would not benefit from using the regular keyboard on a Chromebook or a MacBook or what have you, but could use a different device to better access this game. So now you're having students think about the needs of other students. We're bringing the human aspect into computing, and they're maybe having to do a little research or do a little connecting with students that they may normally not connect with on a regular basis. And so now we're addressing some of these tougher to hit standards, discuss issues of bias and accessibility in the design of existing technologies. Can we talk about the way computers and devices and games are designed that may not be accessible to everybody easily? So now you've modified your project parameters to hit some even bigger issues that are really important, and you're building empathy into what students are doing. You can even add a reflection at the end. So here's a simple thing. Let's add a reflection. Students, when they're done with this project, have to write, imagine your game got so popular that everyone your age was playing it. Should your code for your game be made available to the public or kept private? Why? So once you've built your game and sold it, should your code be visible to anyone? Students at this point will have pretty strong feelings about that one way or the other, right? They just spent all this time designing this code. They may not want to share it with anyone, or they might say, yeah, I want everyone to be able to reuse my code and remix it and build off of it and make it better. And so now, if you were to just ask them that question in general with no context, they may have had trouble addressing this standard, describing trade-offs between allowing info to be public and keeping information private and secure. Is the average 12-year-old going to have strong opinions one way or another? But once they've designed the code and they've made the game and they've done the research and put it together, now you might start to see that they have some thoughts about whether or not their work should be accessible to anybody to just take and reuse however they'd like. So again, these are simple tweaks to an already pretty cool project that allow you to go deeper, connect with the human side of computing, and address a lot of standards. And of course, students have created a new original work, so now we're addressing this emerging and future technology standard that the state of Illinois added on. So congratulations. By beefing up this project, and by the way, this is my favorite picture off Pixabay ever. I will use this over and over again in life. You just addressed 17 standards for the 6th through 8th grade band. So it takes a little critical thinking, takes some creativity and some talking between educators to come up with something like this, but you can take projects that you're already doing and figure out creative ways to make them a little better, a little bigger, and aligning to more and more standards so that you can do more without having to feel overwhelmed that you're doing too much. All right, so with that said here, we're going to wrap it up because we're just getting past our time. But here are some resources that I've pulled together. Obviously, there are endless coding and robotics resources out there. Here's some of my favorite ones. There's links to each of them, and it kind of delineates here what grade bands they're best suited for. If you're looking to get beyond just coding, but also get into robotics or microcontrollers, I mentioned the makeys, but here's some other ones that are really good for a variety of different grade bands, and you can click the links and learn more about those. If you're looking for other sources for CS content, especially for these standards about the impacts of computing and emerging and future technology, there are a lot of really good libraries of resources out there that you can click on to find articles or find other content that may not be coding per se, but that relates to computing in general. And I'm willing to bet you'll find a lot of computer literacy related work here as well to address those computer literacy standards. And if you're in need of more computer science development, PD and so forth, the CSTA is an awesome organization to join. They have several local chapters as well, especially if you're in the Chicago area. They have a Chicago one and a Chicago suburban one, and they have several other chapters as well. The CSTA conference is an annual conference that just happens to be in Chicago this year, so we're very fortunate if you can make it up to that. The LTC has its own resource, and there's a few other resource database, and then there's a few other sites there that I've got listed. I do have a page here with all the documents for today. I'm going to make sure it's updated with that newly released set of computer literacy guidelines that Jesse linked us to earlier. And there's my information as well as the slides from today, the moment you've been waiting for. So I'm going to post those in the chat, and you can feel free to click them and save them, or you can scan the QR code and grab them with your mobile device. And Matt, I tried to keep it under an hour there. I came pretty close, but that brings my part to an end. Thank you all.
You mentioned something about teacher requirements to teach computer science. Are there specific teacher requirements?
Yeah, great question. I don't know that any new requirements teacher facing really appeared, but the best resource you can go to is, there was a document that I posted earlier, and I can find the link for it now, that outlines what teacher endorsements are required at the CS at the high school level. I can't speak, maybe Jesse can speak or type in the chat something related to what would be required K through 8. But at the high school level, there's a document there that I linked to.
Okay. And another question, what if a suggested activity isn't SOPA compliant, I should say SOPA compliant? Will there be some organization from the state to secure Illinois NDPAs for tools that can fulfill these practices? Thoughts on that one?
Yeah, that's a good question. Off the top of my head, I know that there's a few places, and we can include when we send this out some links to this, as I'm not gonna attempt to try and find them on the spot, but you can definitely go and find what agreements are already in place in Illinois. And I know there are several that do have agreements in place. In terms of state efforts to do so, I can't really speak to that so much. But what I can do, and a note to self for later, is to add a slide in here to kind of guide you on what we have SOPA related so far that there are agreements for, and where we're at with some of the more popular tools. Obviously, that's going to be a changing dynamic, and whatever I post in there might not be the same over time, but we'll do our best to try and support people.
Mm-hmm. And I think, to clarify, activities aren't required to have NDPAs. A lot of those paper and pencil things you don't need NDPAs for. But yes, if you're sharing student information, that's a very important topic to bring up. Another question, are the computer literacy standards mandated now?
Yeah, and I don't know that ISBE is necessarily referring to them as standards, although the way they're written and laid out, they almost function kind of that way, right? But they are guidelines, and they go into effect next school year, so the 2022-2023 school year.
And that kind of coattails, there's a similar question in the chat about mandating for different grade levels. So that 2 questions, 1 answer there. Oh, Jesse comments, there are not computer literacy standards. The mandate for computer literacy instruction starts 22-23 school year. Thank you.
Yep, and circling back to Anne, thank you for clarifying, and I appreciate your comments and your questions in the chat as well.